Learn English through story. A lover's shadows. In the dim glow of dusk, the city of Ventura hummed with life. Its narrow streets wound through ancient stone buildings, their walls alive with the whispers of history. The city was known for its romance, its beauty, and the way it seemed to cast a spell over all who entered it. But amidst the charm and the enchantment, there were shadows that hid secrets, and secrets that could tear lives apart. At the heart of this city lived a man named Luca, an artist of some renown. His paintings were admired for their vibrancy, their ability to capture the raw, passionate energy of the world around him. But those who truly knew Luca, few as they were, understood that his art was fueled by a deep, unquenchable longing. He was a man driven by obsession, by love, and by the memory of a woman who had vanished from his life as suddenly as she had entered it. Her name was Celine, and she had appeared in Luca's world like a dream. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, ethereal, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of entire lifetimes. Their love had been a whirlwind, an all-consuming passion that left him breathless, lost in her presence. But one day, without warning or explanation, Celine disappeared. No note, no farewell, just gone, as though she had never existed. Luca was devastated. His grief was a black hole, swallowing him whole. He searched for her, desperate for answers, but it was as though she had never been real. Friends and acquaintances tried to console him, suggesting that perhaps Celine had been a fleeting romance, a woman with her own reasons for leaving. But Luca refused to accept it. He was convinced something darker had happened, something beyond the ordinary. Months passed, and though Luca resumed his painting, something had changed. His work grew darker, more haunted. His once vibrant colors turned muted, his subjects forlorn and isolated. It was as though the shadows of his heart had spilled onto the canvas, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and confusion. And then, one night, the shadows took on a life of their own. It was late, and Luca had been working in his studio, the room filled with the scent of turpentine and the faint flicker of candlelight. His latest painting, a haunting portrait of Celine, stood unfinished on the easel, her eyes half formed, her face a ghostly apparition. As he stared at the canvas, his exhaustion creeping in, something caught his attention out of the corner of his eye. A flickering movement in the shadows near the window. He turned, his breath catching in his throat. At first, he saw nothing, just the familiar shapes of his studio at the easel, the paint-splattered floor, the unfinished sketches pinned to the walls. But then, there it was again, a shadow, darker than the others, shifting ever so slightly. Luca's heart pounded. He stepped closer, squinting into the dim light. It was no trick of the mind. The shadow was moving, as though it had a life of its own. And then, slowly, impossibly, it began to take shape. Before his eyes, the shadow elongated, stretched, and coalesced into a figure. Luca gasped, his mind racing to comprehend what he was seeing. The figure was tall and slender, with the outline of a woman, and though it was formed of shadow, there was something unmistakable about it, something that made Luca's chest tighten with both fear and longing. "Celine?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The shadow didn't answer, but it moved closer, its form becoming more distinct. There was no mistaking it now. The figure was Celine, or at least some version of her. Her features were blurred, her edges soft and indistinct, but it was her. The way she stood, the way she moved, it was also familiar, so painfully real. Luca's mind swirled with confusion. "How a broken bar? How is this possible?" he asked, his voice barely a breath. The shadow Celine stood before him, silent, her face unreadable. But there was something in her presence that spoke to him, something that resonated deep within his soul. It was as though she were calling to him, drawing him in, even without words. Luca reached out, his hand trembling, as though he could touch her, as though she were real. His fingers passed through her form, cold and intangible, like smoke. But even that brief contact sent a shiver down his spine, a connection that defied all reason. "You came back," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. The shadow Celine didn't respond, but she lingered, her presence heavy with meaning. Luca's mind raced, torn between disbelief and desperate hope. Could this really be her? Could she have returned to him in some otherworldly form, trapped between worlds, a specter of what she once was? His heart ached with the questions, but more than anything, he wanted to believe. He wanted to believe that Celine had come back to him, that their love had defied even death or whatever force had taken her away. For days, the shadow Celine haunted him. She would appear in the studio late at night, her form flickering in and out of the darkness, never speaking, never explaining. Luca grew obsessed with her presence, waiting for her each night, hoping that one day she would become whole again, that she would step out of the shadows and back into his life. He stopped painting, stopped seeing friends. His world shrank to the confines of his studio and the dark figure that haunted it. He barely ate, barely slept, consumed by his need to understand, to bring her back fully. His art had always been a reflection of his inner world, and now, his canvas was consumed by the same shadow that followed him. The paintings that emerged were dark, twisted renderings of Selenia, beautiful but haunted, her form always just out of reach, half real, half illusion. One night, as the shadow Celine lingered longer than usual, Luca finally broke. "Why won't you speak to me?" he demanded, his voice raw with desperation. "Why won't you come back? I've waited for you, a broken bar, I've searched for you. What do you want from me?" The shadow Celine turned to him, her face still indistinct, her form wavering as though caught in a breeze that only she could feel. For the first time, she moved closer, standing so near that Luca could feel the cold radiating from her form. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I am not what you think I am." Luca froze, his breath catching in his throat. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but it was unmistakably hers. "What do you mean?" he asked, his heart pounding. "You're Celine, I know you are." The shadow Celine shook her head, the motion slow, deliberate. "I am a shadow, a reflection of what you desire. I am not real, Luca." Luca's mind reeled. "No, a broken bar, no. That can't be true. You're here. I can see you. I can feel you." "I am only what you've made me," the shadow whispered. "A projection of your grief, your longing. You've clung to me, and in doing so, you've given me life. But I am not Celine. I am only her shadow." Luca stumbled back, his chest tight with the weight of her words. He wanted to deny it, to reject the truth she was telling him, but deep down, he knew. He had always known. This shadow, this apparition, it was a reflection of his obsession, not the woman he had loved. Tears blurred his vision. "Why did you leave me?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why did she leave me?" The shadow Celine stood silent for a long moment, her form flickering as though she were fading. "Sometimes, we cannot hold on to what we love," she said softly. "And sometimes, in trying to hold on, we lose ourselves." Luca fell to his knees, his hands trembling. The truth of her words hit him like a blow. He had lost himself in his grief, in his need to hold on to Celine, to bring her back in whatever form he could. And in doing so, he had created something that was never real, something that could never fill the void she had left behind. The shadow Celine knelt before him, her hand reaching out to touch his face, though her fingers passed through him like mist. "You must let me go," she whispered. "You must let her go." Luca closed his eyes, the tears flowing freely now. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice shaking. "I don't know how to let go." The shadow Celine's form wavered, growing fainter. "You begin by remembering who you are," she said. "Not who you were with her, but who you are without her." As her words sank in, Luca felt something shift inside him, a loosening, a release. He had been so consumed by his love for Celine, by his need to hold on to her, that he had forgotten himself. He had forgotten how to live, how to be whole without her. When he opened his eyes, the shadow was gone. The studio was empty, the only sound the soft crackle of the candle's flame. Luca sat in the silence, the weight of the truth settling over him. He had been living in the shadow of his own grief, chasing a ghost that was never truly there. And now, for the first time in a long time, he felt the stirrings of something new. A hope. It would take time, he knew. The wound of Celine's loss would never fully heal, but he could no longer let her absence define him. He had to let go of the shadow, of the illusion, and step back into the light. And so, Luca returned to his easel, picking up his brush with a trembling hand. As the first stroke of color bloomed on the canvas, he knew that this time, he was painting not from the shadows, but from the light of his own rebirth. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.